All right, folks, thanks so much for your patience as we gave people a chance to just get signed onto the platform here. We are going to go ahead and get started. So first things first, I'd like to say thank you for joining us for the first of a three-part series with SideChannel Security, Dragos, and MxD. A couple of notes about the platform before we jump into opening remarks here. First, you may have noticed that you are joining automatically muted and you will stay in mute for the duration of the presentation. If you have questions or comments, please go ahead and feel free to submit those through the question and chat box, and we have moderators on our side who will be keeping an eye on that for the full webinar. At the end, we will manually unmute individuals who have their hands raised. So go ahead and take a look and you can test out that hand raise function. And if you have a question that you'd like to ask directly to our presenters at the end, you'll be able to do so. I would like to note that we are recording this webinar, and post-event it will be available on MxD's website in our webinar library. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Akin, MxD's Director of Cybersecurity, to kick us off with some opening remarks.
Thank you, everybody. And welcome to this webinar. As the title implies, we've got a team of experts here today to help us navigate the waters. And our topic for today is effectively investing in cybersecurity during digital transformation. So what does that bring to mind? One is the effective part. This is not just about investing in cybersecurity as you make your digital transformation. It's also making sure that you get the most bang for the buck. Secondly, what is digital transformation? I think it's also important that we set the tone, or for the purposes of our conversation, we've decided to simplify the definition. Hopefully, we have not oversimplified. So digital transformation in our context, specific to manufacturing, is really doing more with technology and data in manufacturing. What are the implications of this? The implication is that as you go down the path to digital transformation, you're talking about increased connectivity, you're talking about leveraging data and technology. And as you do that, you expand your attack surface. So security becomes an important consideration as you do that, to ensure that you're not only benefiting but getting the most out of your investment in digital transformation. So the challenge kind of falls into multiple categories. First is the who, the decisions regarding ownership and accountability for implementation of digital transformation. And that is a decision that has to be made and an agreed upon plan put in place. So a key consideration is if there's no plan in place or there's no execution according to plan, it could quickly get out of kills to where you have things like shadow IT and OT springing up within the manufacturing space. And this tends to limit your compromise security and limit your prospects and benefits from digital transformation. The other key consideration is the timing. So it's not just enough to bring the key stakeholders into the conversation. The timing of bringing each and every one into the conversation is also critical. So security needs to have a front row seat, so they become part of the plan as opposed to be an afterthought to say, okay, now we've got these tools put in place, how do we secure them? I think if we ever get in that position, we're probably already doing something wrong. So having said that, what we're trying to do here is implement the tools that are necessary, put in place the processes and technology to get the most bang out of the buck that we put into digital transformation, and mitigate the risk that come alongside that, so that we can maximize the benefits from digital transformation. So I mentioned at the onset that we have a team of experts here to help us navigate the waters. I have Brian Hoogley from SideChannel, who would do a much better job of introducing himself after my spiel here. We also have John Lavender from Dragos, who bring significant expertise to this topic. So they'll be able to help us look at this topic in a holistic manner. Brian is, of course, the CEO of SideChannel Security, and John Lavender is from Dragos. So I'll turn it over to Brian first to give us a brief introduction and maybe set the tone for what we get to talk about.
Thank you, Akin. Yep, Brian Hoagley, managing partner for SideChannel. We focus on mid-market and small businesses and bringing strategic and senior level advice to them so they can build those programs, understand what they need to do, address those risks at a affordable and fractional price. So very excited to be here today working with Akin and John on this topic. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
All right, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Akin. Hi, I'm John Lavender. I'm the CTO, one of the co-founders at Dragos. Dragos is an industrial cybersecurity company. We produce products and services that kind of cater to the operations technology and ICS community. Background-wise, spent a lot of time doing a national mission at the National Security Agency. From there, I've been at Dragos. I think I just saw on LinkedIn, I hit my 7-year anniversary, although the company's technically only been around for 4 years, so I'm not sure how that worked out. But I definitely appreciate it. Definitely appreciate MDX having me on today. Definitely looking forward to the discussion. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of kick off. So for those who had a chance to look at the agenda, there's a couple different topics that we'll cover, kind of high level. So again, this is going to be a 3-part webinar. Today, what we're looking at from a takeaway perspective, so what we're hoping you walk away from this conversation with is an understanding of kind of the equation that comes with digital transformation. And that equation is made up of 2 parts. One is understanding that the threat landscape is growing. So when we look at OT and what we understand about threats that exist to operations technology, over the last decade to 5 years, we've seen a growth in the amount of attacks and the amount of interest and intent to have some kind of impact in operations space. That alongside hyperconnectivity, so what comes along with digital transformation when we talk about more connected devices, additional data that's being produced, the expansion of your networks. When you pair those 2 things together, increased threats, increased connectivity, you're talking about a bigger risk surface. So that's one of the key takeaways. On top of that, so the focus of today is around technology, but it's very important to keep in mind that technology is only an aspect of transformation. A couple other very large components that kind of couple together is that traditional people, process, and technology. So there's cultural aspects to it. There's the people and process aspects that come into play that really need to be part of the consideration. Even when you talk specifically about what kinds of technology solutions would help you, understanding how those may impact the people in your organizations and the processes in your organizations is extremely important. And then the third piece, which is kind of bringing things into what's happening today, kind of in this unprecedented time that we're in. We've all been impacted by the pandemic, and kind of understanding how some transformation may be different that we're seeing today that we would have seen a year ago. I've heard different people use terms like pseudo transformation, meaning whether it's something that's forced. So think about connectivity, think about trying to enable your workforce remotely, and kind of having to do so in a timely manner where you may not have you may not go through all the planning that you typically do. Being able to kind of force that style of transformation, but with the importance of doing so with security in mind. So those are the takeaways. So let's actually get into the conversation here. I want to kick off with a statistic that I ran across during a conversation with Microsoft. So over the last year, there was a survey that went out to about 2,700 executives across the OT space. And when I say OT, we're talking companies. You may traditionally think of some of these companies as being IT, when in actuality, a lot of organizations that you may not think of have an operations side. Sometimes you may even get to the point where an IT company you think is actually an OT company with IT security, or with IT is kind of complementing that. But with the survey that went out, about 97% of the responses said cybersecurity is the #1 blocker to achieving digital transformation. And that's a pretty impactful statement to hear, especially when a lot of times you may toy with whether or not you think cybersecurity is a fundamental component of transforming. So to be able to successfully transform your organization to really get the value out of it. Should cybersecurity be an afterthought? Should it be part of the equation? Like, should it actually be part of the equation and one of the requirements? And with that, I'll kind of tee it up to Brian to see what kinds of things have you experienced when you run into conversations about transformation, and in the types of organizations that you've talked to. Has cybersecurity been one of those that is a common theme of being a blocker or not?
So it's the conversation when we're engaging with people, because they are genuinely looking for the right advice so that they don't have security as a blocker. When we're talking to clients or just doing things like this, it's really all around, I know I need to do it, I just don't know exactly what I need to do. And when I make that decision to actually implement something or bring something into my organization or make a change in some degree, I want to make sure it doesn't upset what I've already built. Right. And the first thing that people usually go to is, within OT, it's, the availability and the ongoingness of what's required. But on the business side of things, the first thing that sticks out is I don't want to impact my revenue line or my ability to produce and kind of keep moving sales along. So taking and John, I'd like to hear your view on the OT piece, but if you look at the business side of, okay, how am I selling the things that are relying on or I'm building? The more you think about security as an enabler to take issues off the table in your sales process, the more you can look at it as not being a blocker. For example, more and more customers are going to be asking you, as you're selling something or you're positioning your product or your service to them, they will be asking you about your security posture. They're going to be asking about your background, what's behind that sale, knowing that something else is going to be brought into their organization and sold. Now I'm buying something from you. How do I know what I'm buying is secure? How do I know the data that I'm giving you, right, and I'm your customer, is secure? This will become more normal. Like, to me, that's the new normal, is that cybersecurity is part of the narrative. It's part of the discussion. So if you look at how am I making sure that what I'm doing around cybersecurity for what's needed is as far left in my process as possible in building it, I'm tackling that as an issue. And then how am I making it part of the narrative in my sales process so that it's not an issue for them? And it makes it like really smooth, because how many people, think about it, the folks on attending this, how many have gotten stopped because in a sale or in some part of their business because you couldn't articulate what your posture was on your product or your company? And that customer was demanding that, and rightfully so, right? I mean, they're sharing data or something with you. That was the blocker. So it's almost kind of the inverse now. I think that's the direction it's going. So people are still kind of in this mindset like it's too hard to do and implement. But what they're realizing is it's actually negatively impacting your ability to drive revenue if you don't have it in place. So John, like from the OT side, like on that other aspect, right? Like your view on where has security traditionally been seen as a blocker inside of OT and ICS?
Yeah, no, that's an absolutely great point. When it ultimately comes down to it's an impact on value and an impact on return on the business. So there's a couple different angles you can kind of address it or tackle this. One, I typically always think go back to risk. And if you need to start to understand where you currently are. So if we look at organizations that, depending on where they are maturity-wise for security, you may be very, I'm going to say immature, but you may be very far left on the spectrum of still needing some of the fundamentals to be able to build a security program around, to even when you start engaging those kind of discussions with customers, being able to articulate, maybe not necessarily like the tools and some of the processes you have in place, but being able to articulate kind of like almost storyboard style scenarios is extremely impactful and a very successful way of articulating how you as a company take security seriously and can show that you've gone through exercises and done due diligence. One of the areas that I actually wanted to focus on today is a good leadway is starting to build that risk profile within the organization. So doing so, Brian, like you were saying, doing so very, very far left in the process of before you start to go through a full, or before you start to plan out, or as you're planning out your transformation, to really kind of bake in and understand what the risks are and where from a business impact, security and where from a business impact could you potentially run into risks. So if you think about in the manufacturing space, depending on the size of your company, let's say you have hundreds of manufacturing plants globally, it's very likely that some of those plants are going to be higher up on the priority list than others. And it's very likely that those top level priority plants or lines are going to need to have a better security posture than some of the other ones. And it'll be very hard to keep a very consistent posture across your entire organization. But knowing that and knowing what the impacts are in specific areas can really help enable that conversation of what's the business value add of investing in cybersecurity in certain places. Where can I help articulate to customers that depending on the product line or depending on the geographic location, these are the things we're doing, and this is why we take take a different approach maybe in one place than you do in another. It really helps make that conversation a lot easier, and especially when you can do it in kind of a storyboard scenario.
So you've touched on one of the things that I run into when I'm trying to help people right size what it is that they need to do, right? Because that's the first thing is usually, Brian, I don't know what to do. Just tell me what to do. Where should we start? First, and like you said, you need to protect certain things different than others. But you can't really do that until you actually understand what do you have. And talk about a foundational cybersecurity aspect is just asset inventory, right? What is it that you're trying to defend? What is it that you have? And then aligning that to the business value. And I'll showcase here, but if you have multiple manufacturing operations running, and this one is making you substantial amount of money, and these are not, everyone's kind of legacy view on security is I need to have security across all of these things at the same level. And no one has a money tree. So that's really hard to do. Better thinking and start kind of compartmentalizing this part of my organization, the widgets, the functions, whatever it is that's coming out of this and driven by this line of revenue. This is where I should be putting my focus, my energies, my resources. To John's point, different than others, because if you can determine that, for instance, this is making 80% of your revenue and this accounts for 20%. If you've spent your money and your resources to defend all of these equally, you're doing, your risk is here. And you've actually created a larger risk because you are not appropriately aligning your resources, the limited resources you have available to you, to the areas that could be the most impacted, right? Risk is, right, the actual threat, the vulnerability and the likelihood is what's actually equating to being risk. And you're just kind of saying, oh, the likelihood is that all of them are going to be attacked or impacted. They're all vulnerable at the same level. Well, that's not necessarily true. So, and I think a lot of people still kind of think this way, like everything's equal inside my organization, and they're not aligning it up to what's important. Some people, it might be brand. Some people, it might be the intellectual property. But I think most organizations, businesses can think about, at least by revenue line, how to differentiate what to protect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Easy exercise to do. it just takes some time to do it. And then having the risk discussion around cybersecurity makes it a lot easier, because now you're not sitting there going to your CFO or whoever, I need resources to cover everything. It's like, no, I need more resources to cover this, and you need some resources to cover here and here.
Yeah, and I think during those discussions, some of the important things to keep in mind, the folks that you need in the room to really have an impact, or to say to have an impact, the types of folks and kind of the breadth of role and skill sets of folks that you should have in those conversations is basically across the board. While a lot of times we've run into having very high level executive discussions on what are the potential impacts, understanding kind of the business units and business values, but there's a lot of nuances that oftentimes come into play that it's also important to take in mind. So we typically encourage folks to be more inclusive during those conversations, of potentially bringing in somebody from the plant, bringing in somebody from the OT side of the house, having somebody from the IT side of the house as well. We haven't really talked about maybe some of the differences between IT and OT security strategies, but there are differences into which it's important to have representation across the board when you really go through those scenarios, because what we have seen sometimes, it's not always the case, but sometimes we find out that even though there is greater impact and potential risk in one area when it comes to profitability and value, you may find or discover that, like, based on what's been implemented and kind of practices and procedures in a facility that maybe you didn't realize was connected to other facilities, that you just kind of assume there was, whether it's air gapped or proper network segmentation in place. But having those right people in the room can really help you drill down into that. And there've been some phenomenal exercises. So I definitely encourage folks on the call that if you can, or if you haven't before, think about doing those kinds of exercises with the team. Think about it, not necessarily throwing 50 people in a room together, but kind of pinpointing people throughout the organization that can bring different perspectives in, and really taking, like I've said, storyboard style, that kind of scenario based. So not necessarily focusing on, like, here's a category of threat. Let's say spear phishing. How are we protecting against spear phishing? But, like, look at it from, like, an end-to-end scenario of if an actor was to come in, like, where are the crown jewels within my environment? Where are the areas that would be most impactful to me, or would provide most value add to an attacker, to be able to kind of spread out from.
Right. Well, you're capturing, like, a really great exercise that a lot of organizations should be doing, which is some type of incident response tabletop, right? There's no better, like, everyone's done a very great job about looking at their organization and putting the DR lens of the meteor hit the building, what does everybody go do? Well, the old school thinking before COVID was everyone collectively gets together and goes over to that location together now. Well, now that we're not going to be, storyboarding or going through that tabletop exercise like that, right? Now it's everyone just goes home and we work from home. We could probably concentrate on other impactful incidents to do tabletops on. And the people you want in the room, I'm not only a proponent of everyone you said, but I want legal's opinion, right? I want HR's opinion. I want sourcing or procurement's opinion. I want the business lead's opinion, because they're going to have a view on the ancillary areas of risk that you're not maybe knowledgeable about. Like, hey, if that gets impacted on the floor somehow, do we know that the contract with those folks is written in such a way that the limitations of liability are only so much?
Absolutely.
That's good to factor in. Okay, good to know. Does the guy on the plant know that? Does the president of that line know that? Chances are they don't. It's the person closest to the contract. So, like, that's the kind of things where you run into when you do these types of tabletops or these exercises, where you should be coming into and then out of that room going, Bob from procurement should be here, because he would have the answer to this. That would be a value add so that we don't run into this in the future. So yeah, I love what you're saying, like, getting it. People are used to doing it. I just don't think they're used to doing it when it comes to cybersecurity, and now taking that as the incident that this catalyst to start it off, not a natural event, which we're used to through doing DR and BC planning.
Yeah, and especially over the last couple of years, now that there It's certainly not a good thing, but the fact of that it has happened, now that we've seen more public cases of attacks, so like part of the focus today, or the topic of conversation, is ransomware. Now that we've started seeing more incidents happen, that is a perfect way to learn. Like, yes, it's terrible that those things took place, but it's also a good thing from the standpoint of, now that we have some opportunity to see how companies have reacted, very big players. So we look at types of attacks that we knew about, let's say prior to like 2000, I think some of the dates I have written down, like 2017. That the ransomware style attacks that we saw previous to that were like very, very targeted, maybe affected a machine, or like a small set of machines on your network that was very targeted. That's now grown into this corporate wide impact, where a lot of times, even one of the most recent ones with Norsk Hydro, the impact was significant on the business side of the house. And while there may not be always be direct impact onto the OT side, exactly what you're talking about, if there is an impact to things like how the company operates, how the company communicates, how information's passed, and what disaster recovery, and if you have an emergency response team, how they operate. If your business comms get shut down, if your access gets shut down, like, then what? Like, then you're back to scrambling to pick up a cell phone, and do you have a call tree in place, and do you understand the right people in the organization to give a call to? So I completely agree with you. It is a matter of needing to understand the impact outside of just the security team within the house, but as a business as a whole, how does that impact? And then that's going to start fueling well, as we transform and as we introduce new technologies, maybe now we have new manufacturing lines that we have sensors on those lines that are producing data now that we can understand and try to build efficiencies out of and produce more products more efficiently. How is that going to change the footprint? How is that going to impact the rest of the organization? And so that those conversations and those kind of exercises really have a kind of a trickling effect throughout the organization in your transformation journey.
Yeah, they're going to help you shape what you're doing going forward. As you were saying this, all I could think about was, and we'll probably learn more about this as it comes out, but look at what happened to Garmin recently. Okay, it came out that they had a ransomware effect. We don't know if it impacted their manufacturing lines, their abilities to produce those products. But what we do know is it directly impacted their ability to communicate and share data with all of their customers through their front end. How many times were they able to think about a ransomware event or some type of event actually having that type of impact over that amount of time, beyond just, oh, we're manufacturing, devices, Garmin devices and such, but it was the communications to and the client that was the risk up front that they thought about. That's what we need to protect. Maybe we can wait that we can't ship as many products to stores, and we could allow for some type of impact to our manufacturing, or at least slow it. And is that where they put their resources, versus more of what actually was impacted was their ability to communicate with clients who already had their products in place, right? So I don't know. I'm eager to kind of see if anything else comes out of that, because I think they're squarely in that IT OT security, company demographic, like construct, where this type of an event had was so impactful that you're going to see both sides and which one was, and they put their eggs maybe in one basket, not the other. When we talked about that, now they're obviously a very mature organization, right? And one of the things I think I wanted to touch on out of this was, John, when we were talking about this earlier, was that your tech options are going to vary depending on the maturity of an organization. When it comes to OT specifically, your view, and I'm seeing on my view on IT, maybe it's the same as yours, but smaller organizations look at enterprises and think that's exactly what we need, but we can't afford that. Does enterprise solutions are they always the right one, or how does a less mature or a smaller organization, I think we've got a lot of folks from the SMB space here on the call, how should they be looking at kind of right sizing what's right for them in their digital transformation? Or should they be going for, hey, let me just mimic what the big guys are doing, you know, hell or high water, we'll get that? Or should they be kind of, you know, right sizing their tech in their security posture for being an SMB?
Yeah, no, I think the right size approach is absolutely the one you want to take. Things are going to differ between organizations. There's definitely a lot of commonality across the space and kind of that traditional style of maturity of getting to a certain point where you have kind of three core areas that I typically look at. One is understanding your environment, being able to know what's there. Being able to understand what's happening is a very big part of that. So kind of when you talk about traditional enterprise versus potentially OT products and solutions, you don't necessarily get the same level of visibility. So in the OT side of the house, you have different vendors, different products, different functionality. We get down into things that usually come up like protocols. Just being able to effectively understand what's on your network and what those things are doing is a huge piece of it. And when you talk visibility, the goal is to understand as much as you possibly can about what's there and what's operating, how they're connected. So if you're looking for products and you potentially have a product that's helping you do visibility on the enterprise side or on the OT or on the IT side, that's not necessarily going to translate down to the OT side of the house. So making sure you're looking for products that offer that kind of visibility that's specific in the OT side. Once you kind of have a fundamental understanding and kind of build that base up, so I typically look at it in like 4 steps. Like the first step is kind of what we talked about a while ago of just doing like architecture reviews. It's like it's the people process side. It's like bringing somebody in, whether you have the skill sets or the expertise in house to do those style reviews, or looking externally and having folks come in to help you do an assessment of what does my operations look like. How big of a footprint do I have? What's the network look like? That moves into, well, crap, I don't know what I have in my environment. We've been potentially none of this stuff's been documented, or maybe it has and it's just not well organized or not well accessible. Then looking at products,
I've got on that point, like the thing that I usually tell people is the easiest way to think about it, I cannot defend what I don't know exists.
Absolutely.
Like you've got to know what you have. And I think more and more people just don't know what they have, right? Something got turned on, you know, like in the IT space, it used to be somebody brought in a home wireless router and plugged it into the network, right? In the OT space, it could be, you know, I needed, you know, I bought this, you know, SCADA-based system with cloud connectivity so that I can remotely manage it, and now it's connected in there. It's like, does anybody else know that that's going on, or is it just one part of the operation that does?
Or even to play on that. Yeah, even to play on that, like we've seen in several environments going in where a company's a lot of times on the operations side, you'll have OEMs, so the folks that provide the equipment for you that are also doing ongoing support and maintenance of that equipment over time, where you may think you understand how those connections are set up and how that service and support operates. But what you may find as you increase your visibility into those environments is that, like, whoa, like these things aren't doing it at all what we're expecting them to. Not saying any of that, not stressing on that part is being malicious, but just from an awareness point of view, making sure you understand where those risks are. Maybe in that case, your vendor has like 15 different connections to different parts of the network that you thought maybe, oh, they only have access here, but in actuality, it's all over the place. So just making sure you understand that. And then building onto visibility, you start getting into, now that I understand what I have, and now how do I move forward and how do I help kind of defend it? And that gets into threat detection, being able to understand being able to understand what's happening and whether that applies to different types of threats. At Dragos, kind of throw a shameless plug out here, at Dragos, we take a threat intel driven approach doing detections. There's different styles, there's different use cases to different types of detections. A lot of times you'll hear about anomaly-based detection. In our case, we kind of consolidate a lot of that. So there's our kind of thing we focus mostly on is threat behaviors, really understanding patterns, tactics, techniques of adversaries that are directly impacting ICS across the world, and kind of building that style of threat detection to help organizations kind of get past having past having alert fatigue and that kind of thing, but really starting to build those steps of visibility, detection, and then as your organization matures, going to almost moving into the response category, whether you do that internally or you look externally for response capabilities.
Right. I wanted to draw out for you, like the example that I run into a lot, which I find really interesting, is even if you've got your floor, right, and you've got your IT area separated, the OEM component and support is one that I've seen bite people quite a bit, right? You might be doing a great job of monitoring what's going on here, but somewhere down in your OT environment, some OEM has set up some type of cell phone call out to their support group. How many people know about this? How many people are monitoring that this is happening? And the area that kind of scares me, and I'm not one to push FUD, like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but like when I think about this, I see a rise in support, MSPs, MSSPs getting popped or being impacted. And then those attackers using that as a pathway into an organization to then establish what they want to go do. This area, this like blind trust of support functions, right? And this is the point on like hyperconnectivity and like everything that's rolling out to allow for this to work better, offload support. This is becoming a risk that I don't think enough people are acknowledging or aware of. That's a risk. You're assuming that all of your vendors have everything that they need in place to keep you safe. And how much are you actually assessing them? What are you looking at? What are you actually allowing here? And I think this is an interesting growth area of risk because of this type of support connectivity. So I don't know if you've seen, obviously, you can monitor kind of what's going out, and ideally everything that is happening in an org is going out this way. But there's this back door that's happening more and more, right? And this isn't just representing one. This could represent 15 different products on your manufacturing floor. Each one is coming in and doing this. How exponential does your risk go up because of what you're trying to lessen your burden around support and increase your capabilities, but you're actually opening up your risk.
Yeah, it's definitely a risk area, and it's an area that we've seen in the past. We've seen that style of exploitation happen. It's also important to note that it's not always bad by any means. You absolutely need support.
I'm not trying to discount that. It's an area to like also kind of like fold into your risk kind of assessment or management is acknowledging that this could have a negative impact. Ideally it doesn't, and this vendor has got everything that they need to, but it's just a new pathway that I think previously was never really kind of thought of as one that could be negative.
Yeah, and that definitely harps on the trust scenario of what areas within your organization is there trust, and then how do you build security zones around that trust appropriately. So like the specific types of network segmentation or security controls between those types of zones. What I would highlight, if I had my magic pen, I could draw on that here, would be kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of that hyperconnectivity and almost that pseudo style transformation, where now that we have a remote workforce and we're starting to have to support that more in order to keep our workforce safe and healthy, the amount of lines that were going out of that box would kind of drastically increase. Maybe not drastically, but making sure as an organization, making sure you know that those lines are starting to go out, and they're very purposefully put in place. And as you're going through that, making sure that you do those kind of scenario-based style, let's introduce remote connectivity for some of our engineers to be able to manage some of the production lines. If things were to go down, what types of impacts within the OT space would cause a scenario where I have to send 10 people into the plant to have some form of impact? And at this point in time, now you have considerations from a health standpoint of, if there's a scenario that maybe requires 1 or 2 people to go in, and we've got people in place to do so pretty rapidly, that's one thing. But you have the flip side of that is, if something was to go offline, or there was a certain chain of events to happen within my manufacturing line that would require an entire team to go in, that's a totally different story now that you really have to take into account. And it just kind of changes the paradigm, which is kind of why we're having the discussion today.
Right. Yeah, the forced work from home has definitely, I think we kind of talked on that earlier, like how are people addressing that as part of kind of digital transformation? Before it was a nice to have, now I think it's a must have. Depending on however we get through all of this aside, I think it's now going to be a component of anybody's digital transformation, whether it's a proponent or not. It has to be built in. So let's not repeat the sins of the past. Like, let's build security and have a security mindset so that we can enable work from anywhere, remote work, safe work, whatever that is, instead of enabling it and then figuring out security later and kind of bringing it back in, because it's very, very difficult. This is one area that we've run into quite a bit, is organizations who just were like, all right, everybody work from home. Okay, and then the security risk conversations start coming up saying, well, how are we making sure everyone can securely do this? Where is my data going? Who is accessing this? How is their home network secured? And I think a lot of what I've seen solved is, if you're kind of backhauling things into your own org or cloud, is one, obviously having an understanding of what you have to be able to defend, and then 2, segmenting appropriately wherever, whenever possible, so you can reduce the likelihood that you're going to lose multiple areas. You just have a minimal amount of impact. I think maybe the point is, we're never going to completely remove risk, but we can reduce the impact of risk substantially if we're thoughtful about it early on in the process. And I think that's something that people maybe, they want to jump to, I want to remove risk entirely. And if we can just accept that that's not a reality, and we can just reduce it to a manageable point, then it becomes something more, it becomes doable. So I think that's a big thing that I run into.
I think that's very well stated. I think that summarizes kind of summarizes all those points very well. There is one item that I wanted to add in. We didn't touch a whole lot on today, but I have a feeling it's going to come up kind of in the next in the next part of this series, which is impact and risk, like specifically within the OT environment. So we've talked a lot about security controls, talked a lot about remote connectivity, those kind of things, but an area we didn't dive into too much is actual impacts to operations. So we kind of hinted on things that as you're investing in cybersecurity and moving through transformation, understanding things like crown jewels in the environment, like understanding those or having visibility into the actual devices you have down on the manufacturing line. And as those things become more connected and more data is either residing within them or coming off of them, really kind of understanding how you can measure risk throughout those specific devices in the environment. And if one item goes down, what kind of impact does that have downstream or upstream from those specific devices? But again, I think that's an area that we'll dive into on the next part of this series.
Yeah, no, that's probably something that we could see on calls. Yeah, is there other questions that we've gotten on anything we've gone over today?
Yes, thank you for pausing there. So I do want to open it up to audience questions at this point. We have a few that have come in, so I'll read those here. And just a reminder to the audience, you can go ahead and submit any questions you have into the question box or use the raise hand function and we'll manually unmute. So our first question here, and you touched on this a little bit during your discussion, but can you go into a little bit more detail about what roles throughout the company are important to have in the room when discussing risk and planning out the cybersecurity strategy?
So I'll take a first crack. I mean, you want company leadership because you want to have that risk discussion understood with the tone from the top that it's important. If everyone but the CEO and the CFO are discussing this and they're not paying any attention, which it's hard to believe that they don't want to be involved in a risk discussion, you don't really have the tone from the top that this is important to the organization. So I think establishing that and then working down to the areas where the risk could be impactful, having those people engaged. I believe in having your CFO, HR, your general counsel or legal, your HR team, your procurement team touching contracts as areas, and then actually anybody who's maybe managing your insurance policy or has insight into that. Those are 4 really key areas that I think usually don't get included as maybe some of the other obvious folks.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would definitely second that. And if you think about it from a multi-tier approach, where starting with that group and really kind of defining and highlighting areas that you want to tackle, and then maybe having breakout sessions from there where you're pulling together some of the specific folks that are involved in either the operational side or the tactical side, and building those teams to do the real scenario-based approaches, and then have that kind of trickle up or be part of the follow-on discussion to that. I would say it would certainly span both the enterprise and the operations side of the house.
I would add that don't try to be perfect if this is the first time you're going to go do this. Don't try to be perfect on the first go. Bring in the people that you think are going to be the most important, and through that exercise, you will identify who should be in the room for the next one. So don't stall or hold off because you don't think you have all the right people for the first time. Just go try it, run through it, see what you come up with, and then go do another one that's better, and then go do another one that's better after that. Don't look at this as a once and done type of thing.
Yeah, actually, that's a very important part. Like having these kind of things routine, it just helps right. Iterate and get better and better and better at it.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question is, can you address why it's important for small or mid-sized manufacturers to be diligent about cybersecurity when oftentimes the mindset in some of those organizations is that they might not be the target of an attack?
So
another great question.
John, go ahead, John.
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, I look at it from a couple different angles, and I'll speak to what I've seen. So a lot of times we look at it from a current maturity standpoint of an organization. Not all small to medium-sized businesses are all categorized the same. So I've seen shops that have very good security posture and have a combination of networking engineers, security, that have a combination of networking, security, and operations folks all kind of collaborating together and building out their posture. Awesome. I've seen shops that have little to nothing, where they may outsource a lot of their work because they don't have the skill sets in house, and it's not part of their core business. Mm-hmm. So kind of depending, it all kind of trickles down to depending on where you are kind of as an organization and where you need to start. I would say it's not necessarily specific to medium to small size businesses, but it's more so a function of where your organization's currently at, where you should be focusing, whether it's further back into just understanding your network, or you're all the way up into the space of having to implement collection strategies and getting to the point of trying to implement detection technologies on top of that.
The areas that I've seen is that you're right, you might not be the target. Somebody might just be using you to get to their target. And I think this is where we're seeing a more and more of larger companies or companies assessing who their vendors are, because there's always some type of upstream downstream relationship between a manufacturer and somebody else. So if you're not looking at yourself as being a target, look at somebody else using you to then get to where they need to be. Because if you're the weaker link in the chain and you can be exploited to get to the larger actual target, they will go through you, right? And then you're now jeopardizing a relationship with that vendor, because during their more mature space, they might see through their incident response that you were the reason that they were attacked, right? And now you've jeopardized that relationship, possibly that revenue stream, that supply chain, and then where is your business? So look at that downstream impact as the reason that you should look at yourself as a target. I think defending that relationship is important. And I've heard this kind of more of like, I'm not a target, right? Like, I don't understand how a lot of organizations can still in 2020 still believe that entirely, with just the increased threats that are out there. At some point you're going to roll the dice the wrong way, and it's not going to be good for you. Like, so just taking some basic precautions to start having cybersecurity as part of your framework, as part of your business, is probably the prudent thing to be doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. If I could add on to that, I think I think a very relevant kind of example or use cases that we've seen, especially when we talk about ransomware, is a lot of it comes down to just being opportunistic. It's not necessarily that organizations specifically are being targeted. Sure, some of them likely are, but a lot of times when you get into more just general cybercrime and taking advantages of companies to make money, where you're not necessarily looking at having an impact to the business itself, but you're looking to as criminals are looking to make their own revenue, looking for opportunistic mechanisms to go out and do that. And whether you think, as you were saying, Brian, whether you think you may be a victim or not, based on whether you think you have specific intellectual property that may be a value that would cause you to be targeted. It may just be the fact that you're part of an opportunistic campaign that happens, and
right,
because maybe you didn't put the right controls in place or have the right programs and tools, you may be impacted significantly greater than you would have been to begin with.
Yeah, like not all criminal groups that are out there are all just like, here's my to-do hit list of companies to go after, like brand names. It could just be you were attacked because you were vulnerable. It's like, why put yourself in that position, right? Just shore yourself up so that you're at least not on that kind of, what I've seen is just shotgun approaches of hitting things on the internet and then just coming in. It's not always about being the big brand name. Sometimes it's just wrong place, wrong time on the internet.
Those
These
are great points. Thank you both for that. So we have only just a couple minutes left here. So if I could just ask both of you to kind of summarize just, one or two takeaways that you want the audience to walk away with today about investing in cybersecurity during their digital transformation.
Sure. I'll go first. So I think, first, yeah, like I said, you can't defend what you don't know exists. So really get a good visibility on what you have as an organization and start really figuring out what you're putting in place, what does it mean for your company, and start defending appropriately on that. I think that was the beginning of our conversation. I think, if you start with those two things, you're going to be on the right way to start having solid risk discussions within your organization and start being able to make some better decisions on where to place your limited resources.
Yeah, I would. I'd probably emphasize, as far as a takeaway, like where to start, like what's next steps after this. What if you had to walk away, or if I wanted you to walk away with some specific action items today, I would say starting with understanding the risk in your organization and kind of what your current posture is, or what your knowledge gaps are. Maybe you get to a point where you're like, all right, let's take some time to just kind of go through what would happen with these scenarios. What do I know and I can answer, and where are my knowledge gaps kind of across the board? I think once you can really start building those, building the areas of risk that you either think you need to address or you have a gap in, then you start going down the path of what's next, what types of investments can I make, what types of people or process areas do I need to put more time and resources against to help ramp up, and then looking at how that ties into just business value add, especially as you talk about transforming your business over time and really growing the efficiencies and the value you can get out of your operations side, the types of products you produce, the quality of those products, the quantity, and how security helps kind of enable you to be successful at that and confident in the way you're approaching it. That's kind of where I think I would highlight.
Perfect.
Nice.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Brian. We have just a minute left here, so I want to say thank you also to everyone in the audience for joining us today for this conversation. As I mentioned in the beginning, this was recorded and we will post it on MxD's website in our webinar library. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But with that, I will say everyone have a great rest of your day, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Take care, everybody.